Hi, I'm Reverend Patricia Adams Farmer, pastor of Millersburg Christian Church, and the title of my sermon today is Take Heart. And it looks like we're going to have my cat Oliver with us today too. So, okay, take heart. We have all heard the phrase, there are no atheists in foxholes. Well, it's a figure of speech drawn from images of wartime and refers to any situation of extreme stress. Well, I was recently reminded of the Latin term in extremis, which means in extreme circumstances. And this is what we do in extreme circumstances. We turn to God, even if we have never turned to God before. But all of us have the experience of being in extremis, that is, in a situation so critical that we feel all we can do is just hunker down and pray. In our story in Matthew, the wonderful and mysterious story of the storm at sea and of Jesus walking on water, we find Jesus and the disciples in extremis, a situation that called for intense prayer. It begins with Jesus, after the feeding of the 5,000, telling his disciples to get in a boat and go on ahead. He needed to be alone with God. So he went up a mountain to pray. But why didn't he go with the disciples? And why stop and pray? What was bothering him? Well, Matthew only mentions Jesus praying at really critical moments. And here on this stormy night and in the Garden of Gethsemane are the only two times that Matthew records him praying like this. It is at moments such as these that Jesus draws strength from God, sheltering in the divine intimacy of God's love. But what is so critical on this particular dark and windy night? To put it simply, Jesus and his disciples are in danger. You see, John the Baptist has just been killed by Herod in a gruesome, barbaric beheading. That's why Jesus immediately withdrew his disciples from the towns and villages and headed off to a deserted place. To no avail, though, because privacy was impossible, as thousands sought him for healing. The crowd ended up needing to be fed too, and that was our story from last week, the feeding of the 5,000. Well, such a popular movement as the Jesus movement, it had to draw crowds, and it would not go unnoticed in Tiberias, the seat of Herod's power. This meant red alert, danger, danger for Jesus and his disciples. Perhaps that is why Jesus sent his disciples off ahead of him in the boat in order to protect them from arrest. But he knew he needed to go to the mountain for prayer. Exactly what happens next is lost in the midst of time. But we know that something remarkable happened. A storm arose on the sea in the early hours of the morning, that is, between 3 a.m. and 6 p.m. Oh, 6 a.m., 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. Then it really gets scary because the disciples see what they think is a ghostly figure walking on the water towards them. They were terrified. You and I know that when we're awake at 3 a.m., scary thoughts often assail us. That is the worst time when all of our worries begin turning into monsters, coming from the deep, probably from our subconscious, but it's scary. Our thoughts become scary at 3 a.m. And in that particular culture, they believed that the sea was filled with demons and diabolical monsters, like a screaming nightmare that wakes you up, trembling and fearful. So, in this fierce storm at 3 a.m. in the morning, it's no wonder that they thought something diabolical must have come from the sea. But instead of a scary monster from the sea, Jesus strode across the water, speaking these words, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." For the disciples, it was a moment filled with not only massive relief, but with something akin to a lightning strike. It was a theophany, that is a revelation that God was there, that they were witnessing God, that God was in this place, that God was in this storm. And in that moment, it is little wonder that the disciples responded to Jesus, the one who walks on water, by worshiping him. Exhausted by the storm and overwhelmed by what they had witnessed, they make the first profession of faith in Matthew's gospel. You are the Son of God. And in this miracle, Jesus shows that he is the incarnation of the one who is always in the storm with us, the one who overcomes the chaos of the deep, the turbulent waters, the one who is unafraid of the raging sea. The disciples find themselves in the divine presence, encountering the divine power in all of its strength and protection. But let's look at Jesus' words for a moment, for these words changed everything for the disciples, and there is more there than meets the eye. Take heart were Jesus' first words. Take heart. Another way to translate this is have courage. See, the root meaning of the English word courage is the Latin cor and the French cœur, heart, which may explain the English translations that vary between take heart and take courage. I wonder if Jesus is saying to them, to all of us, that faith means living courageously out of your heart. You are going to have to lead, live, and love with your heart. He seems to be saying, you know who I am. Deep down in your heart, you know me, and you know I am here, right now, in the storm with you. Trust me. Trust yourself. Trust your heart. Have courage. Then he says, it is I. It is I. Now the phrase it is I is translated from the Greek, which literally says, I am. And we all know that I am is another name for God in the Hebrew Bible. And so the disciples would surely understand the name of God, the great I am, the creator of the heavens and the earth. And then he said, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid, one of Jesus' favorite admonitions in the New Testament. We would all do well to simply memorize these words and keep them in our hearts so that when the storms of life hit full force, we can look and find in the eye of the storm that divine presence coming to us with hand outstretched, saying, take heart, it is I, don't be afraid. But the story doesn't end there. Peter asks if he can walk on water too, and Jesus encourages him to try. This part of the story reminds us that God's power is shared power. Peter, in this moment, has the power too. Leaving the safety of the boat, Peter ventures out on the waves, makes some progress, and then loses heart. As he plunges down into the water, he cries out, Lord, save me. Jesus stretches out his hand and rescues him, a dramatic moment for all the disciples, no doubt. God's power is within us all. For God is not a dictator who has all the power. We see here that God empowers us to step out of our comfort zones and into the storm with our eyes squarely on Jesus. We will falter. No doubt we will falter. But Jesus is there to catch us. As Jesus stretches out his hand to rescue Peter, we are reminded of God's action as recorded in Psalm 18. God reached down from on high and took me. He drew me out of mighty waters. We may not be able to walk on water, but with faith and confidence in God, the chaos of life's stormy ups and downs, the disappointments, the setbacks, the injustices and evil can be overcome. Though we might feel weak, broken, vulnerable, and facing very real challenges, the divine power of God revealed in Jesus is there for us to draw upon. If we flounder, and we will, help is at hand. Such faith empowers us. It strengthens us. As the stormy waves of COVID-19 rage on in America, we sometimes feel helpless and hopeless. Will we survive the storm? Physically, emotionally, economically? How will this end? When will it end? Well, this week I read about an elderly woman who survived COVID-19 in Italy. We all know of Italy's terrible death toll with the coronavirus, especially back in the early spring. Well, Italy, and I didn't know this till this week, along with neighboring France, has Europe's largest population of what has been dubbed as the super old. That is people who are at least 100 years old, 100 and up, the super old. And one of those elderly Italian women is named Ada Zanuso. She'll be 104 on August 16th. And she survived against all odds. And asked about her illness, she's very modest. She said, I had some fever. Her doctor said Zanuso was in bed for a week. He said we hydrated her because she wasn't eating, and then we thought she wasn't going to make it because she was always drowsy and not reacting. But then one day she opened her eyes again and resumed what she was doing before. And when asked what helped her to get through the illness, the woman answered clearly and strongly, courage and strength, faith. Her advice to others was, give yourself courage, have faith. Now, of course, while there are many with the same great faith who did not survive, faith nonetheless is one component in the healing process. It strengthens the spirit, and that strength becomes embodied in the immune system. With faith, with courage, with the will to live, with the reason to live, the body does have a better chance against the virus. There are many times in our lives when we feel overwhelmed, when we feel out of our depth, when we feel drowning under a multitude of worries and problems. Grief is just such a storm. When it feels we are drowning in the storm of emotions that flood us when we lose a dear one. Well, the message from today's story is clear. Don't lose heart. Don't lose heart. For it is at times like these that Christ will draw you out of the turbulence and calm the storms of your life. And as we near the end of our lives, you and I will one day have to step out from family and friends and walk through the waters of death. And it is then that we are invited to fix our eyes on Jesus, to trust in him, and to know that he will draw us safely back home, back to the shore, back to God. So, whatever the storms we face, as a nation or as individuals, the message today is take heart. Live from your heart. Have courage. And never take your eyes off of Jesus, who in the fiercest of storms is walking toward you with the words, take heart. It is I. Do not be afraid. Amen.